All right, I think this is a bigger issue than people are giving it credit for. Now, it's happening on our primary day, this whole change in the campaigns for the Democrats and sprinting toward the election in November. But I do think this proposal to change, to reform the Supreme Court is a very big deal. Here's Karen Travers from ABC with a little description.
In an op-ed published today in the Washington Post, President Biden is calling for major reforms to the Supreme Court, including 18-year term limits for the justices and a binding code of conduct and ethics rules. He's also pushing for a constitutional amendment to strip presidents of immunity from prosecution. The president writing, quote, "This nation was founded on a simple yet profound principle. No one is above the law."
Which is absolutely true, and also the Supreme Court reaffirmed that. But just like we give immunity to cops in the line of duty, it's an integral part of them being able to do their jobs. So just to defend this for a moment, because the headlines always bother me, and this is where I get frustrated with people that are covering a topic. Because if you do your homework, you understand that the Supreme Court didn't say that they were above the law. It gave them leeway in doing their jobs. Let me give you an example. There are many people out there that are upset about us going to Iraq. There were many of us that supported it at the time. We were told about weapons of mass destruction, that some people, we never found weapons of mass destruction. Some say they were taken into Syria. But can you imagine if the fringe, and this time happens to be fringe on the left, got their way, and after the presidency, George W. Bush was tried for war crimes, whether he lost or he didn't lose that trial, if he went on trial for war crimes, when there is an official act by the President of the United States. So someone said, well, we could send, the president could then send SEAL Team 6 to assassinate an enemy. No, you can't. It's against the Constitution to use the military against civilians. It's a violation of the law. So the president wouldn't be above the law. These extreme examples of things are foolish. But let's go a little further. Let's go a little bit further. President Biden talking about this, and people have been trying to make these changes for years.
There are documented reports of a decades-long effort to reshape the judiciary, including the Supreme Court backed by shadow special interests that also support Project 2025.
Again, this whole thing about Project 2025, it's just you say it enough times. If you say it enough times, it becomes the truth in people's minds. But here's the deal, and let's take you back just in recent history. We need to have term limits. Reforms are necessary. Listen to this. This is the president explaining why they're necessary.
We need these reforms to restore trust in the courts, preserve the system of checks and balances that are vital to our democracy. They're also common sense reforms.
They're not common sense reforms. They are democratic reforms. I'm not saying Republicans wouldn't do it too if they had in the opposite side, but for years, what was known as, we're not supposed to have liberal and conservative justices, but they're broken down that way. It was a liberal majority on that court for decades. You want term limits now? You had Ruth Bader Ginsburg died in the job because she was so old. She was asked to retire during the end of the Obama presidency. She denied retiring. Why? She wanted Hillary Clinton to appoint her replacement. Well, Hillary Clinton didn't get elected. Donald Trump did. So she didn't give up and didn't retire, but she was overtly liberal in her politics and in her judgment. Did you want to reform the court then, or was it just fine? You celebrated RBG as if she were a cult hero. For what? For her liberalism. They loved her. They loved the liberal lioness on the court. T-shirts and documentaries and all of these other things. And now you don't have the majority in the minds of people, and now it needs to be reformed. Now we need term limits. It's going to, when it's the president says it's going to restore trust in the court. I trust the court. I trust the court as much now as I did then. I disagree with it less, but I trust the court. This is where you start spinning a narrative, and nobody wants to pick it apart. Nobody wants to say, well, hang on a minute. Hang on just a second. Where were you when it was a liberal majority? Where was this uproar about justices being too old, justices staying too long? You appoint a justice in their 30s and they are out and they retire in their 80s. None of it. And now this reform is being handled by people in the media and saying, well, this is why they're doing it. This is Mary Bruce, ABC. This is Mary Bruce from ABC.
The president says that the way to restore trust in the Supreme Court is to establish those 18-year term limits. It does mean that a president would get to appoint a new justice every 2 years. Biden is also calling for a binding code of ethics for justices. And he's calling for a constitutional amendment declaring presidents don't have immunity for crimes committed in office, repudiating the court's recent ruling.
And this is where the president is also aware of the separation of powers. And the separation of powers, you have a code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Who polices it? Does Congress have the ability now to go after and to impeach? How does that work? What this is another loud scream for their base that things are unfair. Well, things are always unfair. They were unfair in your favor for a very long time. When was the last time you look at some of the justices and how they have been labeled these conservative justices, and then conservatives get upset because they vote with the liberals? It happens quite often. Justice Roberts, when it came to Obamacare, and we've seen others. Coney Barrett has made some decisions that didn't side with the Republican or the conservative majority. When do you see what they are called the liberal justices? When do you see them cross over? When do you see them move away from their liberal beliefs? The answer is almost never. And yet that's held in high regard as they're just being true to the Constitution. The other side is always, and it doesn't matter if you're a conservative, the other side is being overtly political. If you're a liberal, the other side is overtly political. Our people stand for the Constitution only. The other side are the ones you have to worry about. Well, it wasn't a big deal when there was a liberal majority on the court. You didn't mind that then. Now it's the other side for you. You don't like it, so now we're going to upend everything about the court. We're going to change the term limits and all of these other things so that you can foster more doubt in the Supreme Court. I think it's dangerous. I think it is a dangerous prospect.
Thanks for watching the Mike Broomhead Show. Catch up on Amazing Arizonans, a KTAR News podcast, and click the button in the middle to subscribe.